It's a nice building. The fair, this is part of the fairgrounds. Oh, oh, that makes sense.
It just smells clean.
Livestock. All in here. Sure. Great.
I've even mentioned some kind of
Recording in progress.
Yeah, they'll find all. Did your mom still have a house and everything?
No,
Okay.
my brother
Lives in, okay.
We actually, my dad died in 2013. We actually let the fire department-
Welcome to the June 1st. Okay. Welcome to the June 1st, 2021 Todd County Commissioner Special Informational Meeting regarding the Lake Shamna Lid Outlet petition. We will now stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to introduce the Board of Commissioners. Myself, I am Barb Becker. I am the chair and I represent District 1. It's Rod Erickson, Vice Chair, representing District 3. On the end is Randy Newman, representing District 5. Dave Kircher, representing District 4, and Gary Knizel, representing District 2. Other county personnel and representatives, we have Nancy Eulenkamp, Ditch and Ag Inspector, Kurt Didiers, our attorney, Lou Naska, Soil and Water, attending by Zoom, Denise Gaida, Auditor Treasurer, and Chris Pelzer, Coordinator. At this time, Kurt will say a few words in ditch location. Just as a reminder, you must, if you speak, you must use the mic so people on the Zoom will be able to hear. Kurt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Kurt Dieter. I'm an attorney in St. Cloud. I provide legal counsel to the Drainage Authority. And in this case happens to be the Todd County Board as Drainage Authority for Ditch 41. I just wanted to kind of set the tone for tonight's meeting and the purpose of tonight's meeting. We have a drainage code in Minnesota 103E, and that code allows for the establishment or what are known as county ditches, and County Ditch 41, Todd County Ditch 41, that Nancy will describe as a legally established system that's been there some time. Under the statute, there's a section 103E401 that allows for petitioners to petition into a system, it's called, where you're petitioning for an outlet from land that is not within the assessed area. And that's in the statute and has been used many times around the state for a number of different purposes. What I want to say about tonight, though, to begin with, is tonight is not the public hearing. Tonight is strictly an informational meeting. The statute allows for informal meetings. The board as Drainage Authority will not be making any statements tonight, will not be taking any positions tonight. Or at least that's what I'll be advising them, because it'd be improper and inappropriate to make any decisions at an informational meeting. This is simply what it says, an informational meeting to allow the petitioners, the Lake Shamna Lid, to present information, which is sometimes easier in this context than in a public hearing. People are a little more informal to ask questions, but again, neither I nor the board will be taking any position, because there will be actual public hearing at a later date that I believe we'll talk about later, but I believe it's going to be June 29th. So for those that are in the audience or on Zoom, and I don't want to, you may have a position one way or the other, but tonight, none of that is evidence tonight. So if you have a position, tonight's just get information. On June 29th, you'll be able to make any comments you want one way or the other, or maybe don't have any feelings, but I don't plan to interfere or be involved other than when we get to the questions and answers or questions, I may moderate that. But I really want to stress that tonight is strictly an informational meeting. And when we get to the public hearing, then I'll go through what the statute says. But I think the LID appropriately wanted an informational meeting, like a lot of situations, just to get information out there. So unless there's questions of me, Madam Chair, we'll simply go through the agenda, and I think we'll cover the things the LID wanted to cover in an informational meeting.
Nancy.
Okay, so I just did a really quick little presentation. You can go. You took my clicker. Okay, oh, sorry. Okay, so we can, let's see if this works. Okay, so the history of and location of ditch 41. This ditch was built in 1916. It's located in Fawn Lake Township. It was actually designed to be 23.74 miles long, but the approved ditch was only 12.8 miles long. Original ditch cost $23,792. There are no records of any projects since the original assessment in 1916. I had some documentation from 1984 that a petition was submitted to clean the ditch, but I can find no records of any assessments done beyond per diems for commissioners to attend meetings. So there's nothing saying it was denied, but my assumption is it was denied because there was no other documentation. Beaver trapping and dam removal and ditch inspector fees are really the main expenses on this ditch system. It has a huge beaver problem. It's actually gotten better over the years, but in 2013, when the ditch systems were all brought up to date, there was an assessment done in 2013 for the $5,484.23. And that was for beaver control and dam removal from the years 2008 to 2012. And that brought the ditch system up to date on what bills were owed. And then 2015, there was the assessment that was all beaver dam removal and trapping. 2018's assessment was also beaver dam removal and trapping. We kind of did year-round trapping, 2018 and 2019. We pretty much trapped year-round and did dam removal whenever dams were found. And then in 2020, we only had to assess $500 because there was less beaver dams reported and less trapping done. And 2021 assessment was $500. And again, less trapping. For the 2022 assessment, there was some more dams reported this year. And so I've got people trapping now and will be more dam removal. So next year will be assessment for that. And then I just put up a map, but the engineers got the same map and has other information. There's some sections of the ditch that the ditch that was approved, they did not, for some reason, they left some of the laterals out there on the main, on a public waters without attaching it to the main ditch. I was never able to find any information why that was done that way, but there were sections of the creek that were not clean. So there are laterals that are actually not attached to the ditch. That's kind of one weird thing about this ditch system. And then the areas that are in pink were areas that were in the original petition to be built and they were not approved. So those areas are sections of ditch that were not built. And that's all I had. So now I'll turn it over to the lid.
Should my clicker work now, Chris? Okay. Right. Oh, oh, there we go. Welcome. Good evening. My name is Cindy Kevern, and I want to thank you for coming to our informational meeting, whether you're in person or on Zoom. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Todd County Commissioners for allowing us to have this informational meeting and share a little bit of information about our high water project. A couple of notes before we get started. LID, we use that word constantly, and it stands for Lake Improvement District. We also say LSLID, just means Lake Shamana, Lake Improvement District. So we call ourselves a LID all the time. I just want to make sure that people know why we're using that word. Also handouts, we did supply two-page handout as well as some route maps and flowage maps are back at the table. If you don't have one, it may be helpful to have for our presentation. Also, I want to mention that if you think of a question after the meeting or perhaps during the meeting, you don't want to ask it here, we do have contact information included. So feel free to send us an email or jot down a piece of paper and hand it to one of us, and we'll certainly try to get that answered for you. This is our presentation here, number 3. We're going to do some introductions, provide some background, and then John is going to talk a little bit about the petition process. Mike is going to give more of the technical information and overview, and then I'll wrap it up with some next steps. I have a few slides and I only have a couple, so I don't want to make you think you're going to get bored to death. But I do want to note one thing before I get started. Every slide here has a picture, and they are pictures from our lake. So they're all pictures of lake homes and cabins on the lake. And what we'd like to do is begin with introductions from our board. But to do that, each of us is going to tell a little story about our experience on the lake and with flooding. We thought this might help because we actually are a cross section of the lake property owners. And I'm going to start. Again, my name is Cindy Kevern. I was on the LID board for 4 years, served as chair of the board. And now I'm acting actually as have responsibilities as an administrator. And I also am helping out on the high water project. My husband and I have owned a cabin on the lake for 26 years. For 20 of them, we were seasonal cabin owners, just up on weekends. And for the last 5 to 6 years, we actually, it's our home that we spend summers on. So we updated, upgraded, etc. While our cabin is 13 feet above the water, so we'll probably never get flooded, we have had significant lakeshore damage. We've lost probably 5 to 10 feet of lakeshore. We've had to spend a lot of money on repairing our lakeshore. In fact, we spent over $15,000 on lakeshore repairs. And quite frankly, as you see others tell their stories, we consider ourselves lucky on the lake compared to what others have had to suffer. Next, I'd like to introduce Rick Rosar, who is the chair of our board.
Hello, commissioners and audience. Yeah, my name is Rick Rosar. My family has been enjoying this area for over 50 years. I myself have been coming here, and when I say this area, I'm talking east to the Mississippi, west to the Long Prairie River, north to the Crow Wing. And my grandparents on my mother's side came from Staples, and on my grandfather is from Barville. So I kind of settled in on Lake Shamana because my grandparents would bring me to this area, and it's one of the areas that they loved coming to on Lake Shamana. Although they didn't live right nearby, it was one lake that they liked to visit. So we started out staying in some resorts around the area on the lake: Augers, Shamana Acres, Houts, Teshes, just some of them we used to camp at. And about 30 years ago, we decided to buy a home on the lake, which we did. And we lived next to Augers for some time. And as our family got larger, we ended up selling that place and ended up building a home 6 years ago on the east side of the lake. Now, when we built the home, we followed, all the county ordinances, all the state ordinances. You had to be 75 feet back from the ordinary high water mark. At that time, the ordinary high water mark was 10 feet into the lake. So we built our house actually 80 feet from the water's edge for an abundance of caution. I believe state statute is you have to be 3 feet above the ordinary high water mark. And we built our home probably 3.5 feet above that mark. Now last year, when we went out in the backyard and dug a hole, the water was 6 inches from our basement. So we're not quite there yet, but we followed all the rules. And some people might say these people are built their homes too close to the lake. And that's not the case. Most of these people followed the rules and are in the situation they are today. Thank you.
Next, we have Bob Cole, who is the vice chair of the board.
Thank you for allowing us to be here today, express our situation. I moved my family, which was at the time 1970. We moved up here. That was 51 years ago. We bought a cabin that had a footprint, the foundation footprint on it. And at that time, we had a lot of sand in front of us and some vegetation, some trees. Now, at that time, our surface level of the lake was 7 feet lower than it is now. And so now, with that 7 feet of water in it, we're a lot closer to the lake. We've got the water just below our foundation. And so it required us last year to put in a big sump pump inside the house. So I had to take the walls off the basement that we raised our family in for 51 years and take out the electric. We had electric down there, heat, water, hot water heat. Take that off, take all the carpeting out, take the furniture out, get everything ready so this company could come in with jackhammers and saws and put all around our perimeter channels for water to go into and for us to pump out. And so we still love our home. We spent some money getting it back to where it is, or close to back to where it was, and hoping that through cooperation with other property owners and property owners around the creek, that we can create an outlet for our lake, because we have no outlet on Chaminade, and we do have some inlets coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Fred Combe, our treasurer, who is actually on Zoom.
Yes, if you could, just let me know that you can hear me on Zoom. I may be the first one participating by Zoom.
We can hear you, Fred, but you might want to talk just a little bit louder, but we can hear you.
All right, I will do so. Thank you. Hello, I'm Fred Combe. I am the treasurer of the Lake LSLID. And if I may, I'd like to take a moment to explain a fun fact about the home that you see in the photo on your screen in front of you now. My grandfather built that home in 1930. Originally, the home had a walkout basement and 75 feet of beach in front. My grandfather was in the Army and relocated to Lake Chaminade because of his position at Camp Ripley. At the time, there were fewer than 10 homes on the lake. My grandfather's best friend was General George Leach, who built the home next door to this. It was actually a twin, almost a twin. They looked very similar. General was known for many things, one of which is that he was reelected 6 times as mayor of Minneapolis in the 20s and 30s. Some of you may remember in history in high school learning about a massive trucker strike back in the 30s. Minneapolis was home to many large national trucking companies. As the strike grew longer, the strike grew larger and more violent. The general used his summer home on Lake Chamano as a place to bring together Teamsters and business leaders to discuss and negotiate their differences and settle the Minneapolis truckers strike. One of the few fun facts about that time. There were no driveways at the time to reach these cabins. Believe it or not, people would actually drive across the lake shore, drive across the beach to reach these cabins. And it was quite funny. Literally, parades of cars would drive down the beach at this time back in the 30s to attend those meetings. And we know that because the car is parked in front of our cabin. Long story short, the trucker strike was settled long ago, but the water on the beach has been rising for many, many years. In fact, 7 feet of water, as Bob Cole mentioned, 7 feet of water now covers the spot where those cars parked in front of this cabin you see. Thank you, Todd County, for your time and your energy. I hope we can all find a way to find a solution, and we can all find a way to work together to solve the problem. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Tim Rice, who is the director for the LID board.
Thank you for the opportunity to introduce ourselves and to be here this evening. I'm Tim Rice, and I'm new on the LID board, just getting on this last September. I myself I did have a seasonal cabin. I had that for around 13 years with my brother. And then for the last 7 years, I now have a permanent home, again, on the east side of the lake. As far as what I've experienced at this point, I've had to invest about $15,000 into just protecting the home. Maybe one advantage is I used to have to go out a ways to put a lift in the water. Now it's right up to shore. So that's to the point where it's almost too close. But just the change and just trying to protect the property. But we continue to invest, into retaining walls and pumps. My neighbor itself, he purchased the property, and I told him this is a great place to buy a lake home. Since then, he's spent, I know, over $25,000 and thanks me every day when he says this was your idea. So how to develop neighborly relationships, but I still tell him it's a great investment and it's a great lake, and that we are working on solutions. I think the other part for us over on our side, we also have a pond on the other side that's also encroaching. So really, for some of us, we have water that's encroaching on both sides. For those of you who do not know me, I am President CEO of Lakewood Health System in Staples. I've been there 41 years. I guess the reason I bring that up, being here that long, this really is my home. This is where my home is. And if anything I've learned over time about living here and being our home is that there never are perfect solutions to everything, but I do know that our intent is to try to find the best solution and do the best that we can for everyone. So, but thank you for the opportunity for us to be here.
And then we also have Artis Sandstrom, who's the secretary for the LID board.
Good evening. And again, thank you all for taking the time to come in tonight, and especially all of you in the audience. It's really important for us to be able to share the information so that you have a better understanding of our project and how it's going to work. So thank you all for taking the time to come in tonight. My name is Artis Sandstrom. My husband Terry and I retired on the east end of Lake Chamana in 2002. And that was after a full year. This is our 7-year retirement plan. So we were going to be these really smart people and get it planning so we could retire. And we found our home up there, and we moved in 2002. One of the things that really drew us to the house was we had 200 feet of shoreline, and we had about 20 feet of beautiful sand beach. And with our grandkids, we knew it was going to be a big hit. And pretty soon it was too big hit. Our kids were there all the time. So about 2009, we started to really see the water marching towards our house. And so we started to sandbag along the shoreline, and we naively used to just joke, well, if you see a tent on the roof, you know we're really in trouble, not understanding that this was really going to be fruition for us. So what happened then is the water started to march every year. We started to add sandbags to the shoreline. Then the sandbags weren't enough. So then we got permitting and we completely riprapped our entire shoreline. And then that wasn't enough. And then we started adding more sandbags to the shoreline. And pretty soon the water pressure was coming up through the ground. So we started adding sump pumps to our yard to try and keep the water away from our house. Well, by last summer, we had 9 sump pumps running and 5,000 sandbags around our house. And on March 26, 2020, in the spring thaw, it was a week after our governor said, stay home, don't get out, we have a pandemic. And on that March 26th, we noticed in the morning that the thaw was so that the lake was coming over our road. And we had 25 minutes to quick grab our stuff, pack our bags and get our cars out. And when I drove out, I told my husband, I want the truck, it's higher. I'm afraid of going through this water. And we drove through 3 feet of water. And in the end, we had almost 4 feet of water over our road and we were not able to get back to our house. It was an island amongst 5,000 sandbags. We have not been able to get back to our house. At that point, we got in there. We capped the sewer because we wanted to protect it. We didn't want the sewer out in the lake. We emptied our house with side-by-sides because our only way to get out of the house was to take a chainsaw, and 6 wonderful neighbors let us make a chainsaw road through their land so we could get down to the house, and we emptied our house with side-by-sides. We've been able to keep our house dry. Today, it's still dry. We did get out there this week and we uncapped the sewer. But at this point, we still aren't there in the house. So we have been without a home ever since March 26th of 2020. Thank you for your time.
Before we get into the technical details of our project, we'd like to provide some background to tell you how we got here. And this picture, by the way, for those of you who know, the lake is near Augers. That's an Augers cabin there in the background there. I'm sure many of you are aware of Shamina. It's just to the east of us here. It's about 1,400 acres. There are about 300 homes, cabins, and commercial properties on the lake. We have 2 resorts, and of course, we have Camp Shamina. Of those 300 homes, we have various sizes, various ages, seasonal and permit, various elevations, and some like this are underwater, and of course, because some are higher, they are not. The lake is a closed watershed basin with no outlet. As you've heard, there's been increasing water levels for many years. The water has risen over 7 feet since 1962. 62 is a base year. It's actually the first year that the DNR recorded elevation readings for Lake Shamina. The lake is now 2.3 feet over the ordinary high water level. And just to let people in the audience know what that means, if you just pretend you take the bottom of a tree and you go up 2.3 feet, and then you start going back until you reach land. And that's what people face here, is that's how much the water is back off the shoreline. The rise in the water is caused by higher than normal precipitation. Perhaps many of you have noticed that over the last number of years as well. And of course, because the lake does not have a natural outlet. The LID has the support of a majority of the lake owners for this project. In fact, we've had several votes on the project. The most recent was August of 2020, last summer. We had over 74% vote in favor of moving forward with the high water project. So we do have the backing of the majority of the property owners. The purpose of the high water project is to establish a maximum operating level, which Mike here is going to talk about a little bit in his presentation. By the way, this is also a cabin that was destroyed. It's actually destroyed at similar time to when Artis started having her problems last March. The project includes the installation of a lake outlet structure and pumping station at the west end of the lake. The water would then flow west, eventually reaching ditch 41 and then flowing to the Long Prairie River. And again, that you do have a route map that we handed out, and Mike is going to talk a little bit more about the route. The LID has worked closely with the property owners along the route to ditch 41. So for example, if you just take Highway 10 over to where the ditch starts, during that piece of the route, we have worked with those property owners in Todd County to ensure that the route and the water will not be detrimental to their property. And we have obtained agreements for easements with the Todd County property owners west of 10 again to ditch 41. They've also supplied us letters of support. And in fact, speaking of letters of support, we received a lot of letters of support, not just from those property owners, but also from property owners along ditch 41 and other Todd County residents. And we'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has signed a letter of support. We really appreciate that support for our project. While not all that signed those letters of support could be here tonight, or perhaps won't even be there on June 29th, they want us to send along and let everyone know that they do support our project. In fact, I wanted to mention that I believe yesterday we sent along to the Todd County Commissioners 51 letters of support, and we're actually receiving more. So we're hoping that that number will even increase. If any of you in the audience have not had it, would like to sign a letter of support, have not had that opportunity, we do have some blank ones at the table if you want to sign and leave it, or leave it with one of us. Or for those of you on Zoom, if you would like to send us an email, we'd certainly love to send you a letter of support for you to sign and send back to us as well. A little detail on some of the funding. The project will be funded through charges to the Lake Shamana property owners. The LID actually operates as a taxing district, so we tax ourselves for this project. So when I said earlier that 74% approved the project, they not only approved the project, they approved paying for the project. And I think that's an important thing for everybody to realize, is that we are paying for it ourselves. There's no petition costs. There are costs, obviously, just to do this process. The LID is paying for them. It will not be paid for by Todd County residents. And one of the things that we're very excited about is that Morrison County recently in May approved a resolution to contribute $200,000 toward the maintenance of ditch 41. They did that to show their support for the LID and to show their support for this project. Now that $200,000 will be available to Todd County upon award of a construction contract for the high water outlet project. So that means ditch petition gets approved, we go through design, we bid out the construction. Upon the award of that contract, that $200,000 would be available. Another important piece for everybody to know is that an operating plan will be developed for the project. And we're developing that by working with agencies, Todd County, for example, DNR, other agencies. Some landowners will have provided input. And Mike will talk about in more detail, but it actually will discuss or lay out, I should say, when the pumping will occur and when pumping has to be paused. So there'll be some oversight through this operating plan. And then lastly, managing the lake level will assist the surrounding watershed by creating a storage area in the Morrison County wetlands, preventing excess rainwater to immediately flow downstream to Todd County. Why is this so important to us? What if the petition is not approved? If the petition is not approved, the high water outlet project, as we're laying out tonight, will not be able to move forward, since the access to ditch 41 is important for a key component to reach the Long Prairie River. So obviously this petition process is very important to us. And if the project doesn't move forward, there'll be continued flooding of homes and roads, more property damage around Lake Shamana and Scandia Valley. And of course, that $200,000 for maintenance of ditch 41 would not be available. And with that, I would like to introduce John Shockley, who's here to my left. He's an attorney with the firm Onstead Twitchell. The LID has hired John to assist with the legal aspects of the project, and he'll be reviewing the petition process. And he probably needs that.
Thank you, and thank you to the members of the county commission for having this informational meeting tonight. I'm just going to have brief comments tonight about the petition process. As was said earlier, the petition process is governed by Minnesota statute 103E401. After the construction of the drainage system in 1916, we can't utilize the drainage system as an outlet without the express commission of the drainage authority, that being Todd County. The authority to do that is gathered through the filing of a petition and ultimately the granting of that permit. For the members of the public, that petition was filed with Todd County on March 8th of 2021. It described the necessity for the project, which you're hearing more about tonight, and the project features. It also included an engineering report on ditch 41 and its capacity for the project. Having worked on several of these types of projects in the past, I think one important takeaway is that when we talk about capacity of the ditch, this isn't like a typical drainage project in which the drainage is uncontrolled into the drainage system. Because pumps are involved, those pumps can be switched on and off to match when you have peak flows and limited flows. And Mike from Houston Engineering will get a little bit more into the capacity of the drain. The filing of that petition, as the board knows, has caused the county to set the public hearing date, which is set for June 29th. So at the public hearing, the LID will again make a presentation on the project. Our understanding of reading the statute is that the main consideration during the public hearing is the capacity of ditch 41, which Mike will get more into, but we believe that the petition is consistent with that capacity because it is not an uncontrolled discharge into that drainage system. If Todd County grants the petition, the permit would set the terms and conditions for the use of ditch 41. That could include having to follow the operating plan, having to comply with DNR rules, and other normal terms and conditions that you would see within a permit. It will set the outlet fee for the use of ditch 41. As has been said before, that'll be paid by the LID. So we're not expecting the property owners along 41 to pay for that. That's a LID expense. And it'll also describe the property that is benefited by the use of ditch 41. Given that this is an informational hearing, I don't want to take up the whole time period. And I think the most important person to describe a lot of the project is Mike from an engineering perspective.
I agree. And next, I'm going to introduce Mike Opat from Houston Engineering. The LID hired Houston to complete the project design, surveying, permitting, coordination with agencies, and hopefully, if we get to that point, we'll oversee the construction. Mike is the project manager and engineer from Houston that's been working with LID. And with that, Mike. we have the table.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Cindy. I'm going to do my best to keep this microphone in front of my mouth so that everyone can hear this. But Chris, if you can keep an eye out on Zoom to see if anyone chimes in because they can't hear me, that would be great. So I'm going to give just a quick overview on the project itself from a LID perspective. So that's covering the transfer of the water from the lake downstream. Primarily we're here to talk about ditch 41 and the water moving through that system, but I think it is helpful to give an overview of how the water gets from the lake to the ditch. So, well, before we get into that, I just wanted to include some terminology here for everybody and some important information. So you're going to hear a lot of reference to the term CFS, which is cubic feet per second. That's a flow rate, so that's a volume over time. Maybe to help provide some context there, 1 cubic foot is 7.48 gallons. So Oftentimes you'll hear water movement in gallons. That gives you some context there. We'll talk about AIS, which is aquatic invasive species. And then there'll be some terminology in terms of a 2-year flow or a 2-year discharge, or similarly a 1-year flow or a 100-year flow or a 100-year discharge. That's pretty common when you start hearing floods and those types of things. And a lot of times there's a misconception that, oh, we had a 100-year flood last year. That means we won't have to deal with it for another 99 years. Well, it's a misnomer. And really what that means is, for example, a 2-year flood means there's a 1 in 2 chance that event could happen in any given year. Similarly, a 100-year event has a 1 in 100 chance of happening. So it doesn't mean that we're in the clear if we had one of those events the previous year. Also, I just want to point out that there's a lot of data out there, and with the plans for the original ditch being from 1916, that was well before the establishment of the vertical datum of 1929. And now a lot of the modern datum references the 1988 datum. So they're all a little different and they need to be adjusted accordingly. Unless otherwise noted, we're referencing everything in the 1929 datum tonight. You'll also see a lot of dimensions and distances and those types of things that are shown in feet and tenths or hundredths of feet, as opposed to maybe feet and inches. So I've done my best to try to convert that where appropriate. But you can also see there that an inch is about 0.083 feet. And conversely, 0.1 feet is about 1.2 inches. So pretty close, but just a slight difference there. So with that, I just want to go through an overview of the project. The project, I guess the beginning, so to speak, would be the lake intake, which is going to be in the southwest corner of Lake Chaminade. For those that are familiar, it's kind of by the curve on Aztec Road. There'll be a gravity pipe that extends out into the lake that will collect the water through a screening system. From there, the water gravity flows to a pump station, which will be right at that curve on Aztec Road. The pump will be in an enclosed cavern or a wet well that'll be buried in the ground there. We have a building that's proposed to house the AIS filter that will be required by the DNR. So there's Eurasian water milfoil in the lake, and so we'll be filtering that out, and no unfiltered water will move downstream. So that will be housed in the building along with the electrical equipment and the controls required to operate that system. And as we've talked about, this system is unique in terms of an outlet petition like this, in that it has a pump and it can be controlled. So if the downstream water bodies can't take more water, the pumps won't be running. And if there's excess capacity and all the conditions are met, we'd be able to use that pump. So with the pump, then we need a force main system. That's a pressurized pipe to take that water. So that pipe will follow Aztec Road out to Highway 10. It'll follow US Highway 10 down to County Road 203. And from there, it'll discharge into what's known locally as the Blue Line Ditch, which was recently cleaned out. And then as we approach Atlantic Road, there's a bypass channel that's going to pick up that project water, which is 10 cubic feet per second, and take that around the natural flow area where there's some wetlands and a private dam that didn't want more water in it. So we're going to take a bypass around it and then put it back into that tributary, which then discharges into Fish Trap Creek and makes its way downstream to the railroad bridge, where Fish Trap Creek turns into the main ditch of Todd County Ditch 41. And that brings us to the outlet petition and why we're here tonight. So as we've talked about, the discharge rate will be a maximum of 10 cubic feet per second. This was a balance between the downstream capacity and lowering the lake down as quickly as possible. Some of you may be familiar with a previous project that the LID had pursued a few years ago, where they were looking at a slightly larger flow rate. After some further analysis and discussions and hearing concerns from downstream folks and the agencies, they went with a lower flow rate for the current project. Also wanted to point out that for those that are familiar with the one watershed, one plan process that's ongoing for the Long Prairie River, Lake Chaminade and its watershed is included in the Long Prairie River watershed. And it sounds like high water on lakes is one of the priority issues that's been discussed. So this project actually fits within that planning effort that's underway from the one watershed, one plan side of things. As John talked about, and I've mentioned here, we're really just seeking to utilize the excess capacity in Todd County Ditch 41 to move the water out of the lake when the ditch has the capacity to take more water without causing any flooding or adverse impacts. So that's what we'll get into here throughout the rest of the presentation. With that 10 cubic feet per second pumping rate and the assumed operating conditions and assumptions for precipitation and evaporation and those types of factors, we're estimating that it'll take 3 to 4 years to draw the water level in Lake Chamano down from its current level down to the ordinary high water level. So that is the target elevation, is the ordinary high water mark. They're not targeting to go any lower than that with the project. As I mentioned, the project includes an aquatic invasive species filter. The water quality in the lake itself is actually very good. So we would be moving filtered water of a very high quality into the downstream creek and river systems. So we should not have any issues from that standpoint. As Cindy alluded to, we've been working with property owners along the route with a special focus to date with the landowners in Todd County, basically extending from the county line down to the beginning of the ditch. And LID has agreements with those folks in terms of both construction agreements where construction activities would actually take place, as well as flowage easements to permit the flow of water over those natural waterways down to the ditch. And then from there, the use of the ditch, as Kurt and John have talked about, is handled through the petition process through the board. As we've talked about already, there would be an operating plan, and we'll get into that here in a little further detail. So the operating plan is going to be a condition of the DNR permit. There will likely be conditions that the county board places related to the outlet petition that would also be incorporated into that. And it really, just to boil it down into simple terms, if the ditch doesn't have capacity, the LID will not operate the pump. If the ditch does have capacity, the LID might operate the pump if there's a need on the lake and if all other conditions are met. Again, we'll have the opportunity to put those conditions into the plan before it's approved and adopted. At this point, we do have a draft put together. We have circulated that to the DNR for their initial comments. We received a couple of minor comments from them here recently, so we're going to update things. We'll take any feedback we do here tonight and incorporate that into the draft. And then our intent would be to provide a copy of the updated draft to the county prior to the petition hearing, which is scheduled for the 29th. So our hope is that we can give everyone an opportunity to review that, take a look at what's in there, and then offer suggestions and specific operating conditions that the county, on behalf of the ditch benefiting properties, would like to see in there. I just want to point out that the operating plan does not guarantee that the LID will be able to operate their pump. So really the risk is on them from the standpoint that they're going to invest in the infrastructure of the project, but if the downstream conditions don't allow for them to move water, they will not be allowed to do so. So that's an important factor here. I just wanted to stress on that. In terms of the operating plan, a couple key points. We'll again, not operating the project in the ditch does not have capacity. And really, I think what we're finding is that the upstream channels, namely that blue line ditch, are going to be the limiting factor because they're much smaller channels. So for us to move the 10 CFS through there, the conditions are going to be more critical than it would be to add that water to Todd County Ditch or the Long Prairie River. A major component of the operating plan is going to be monitoring, and the LID will be required to monitor conditions throughout the downstream waterways. So that would include the Blue Line Ditch and the tributaries all the way through Todd County Ditch 41, as we would agree to with the county board in terms of where they would like monitoring to be completed. We can also discuss the timing and the frequency of those monitoring activities and incorporate that into the plan as well. And then the plan will also include considerations for weather conditions and seasonal climate conditions like spring runoff. So on other projects, we've seen, considerations for weather forecasts and spring flooding forecasts, and we've incorporated that into the plan, and that's generally worked pretty well. Nancy had given an overview of the ditch, so I won't get too much into the detail there. I do have copies of the original plan sheets here on some slides. If anybody has any questions on that later, we can certainly come back to this. I think you've seen at least one of these maps in Nancy's presentation. The one on the left just shows the areas of the ditch that are included in the official ditch, both the main ditch and the laterals. And then the map on the right shows those same ditch reaches along with the benefiting parties that are assessed for the ditch. So that kind of leads into just a few more comments that I wanted to make on top of Nancy's. So with this map, we've kind of added some flow directions and a few labels that I wanted to point out. So for those in the audience, you might be able to see my pointer. I apologize for those on Zoom, but off to the right side of the map, there's a label here that says Lake Chamano Discharge Point. Thank you for the help there with the cursor. So that's the location there where the Fish Trap Creek crosses the railroad, which is also coinciding then with the beginning of the ditch. So the water will, from the lake improvement project, will come into the creek, flow under the railroad bridge, and then continue to flow in the creek, which is then Todd County Ditch 41. And from there, you can follow the arrows. The water is going to follow the main ditch. I think it's about 6.5 miles roughly downstream. It's not going to flow, into any of the laterals. Most of those laterals were designed to enter the main ditch above the bottom of the ditch. Some of them are a few feet higher than the bottom of the ditch, at least as they were designed. So there's also, it looks like 22 feet or more of drop from the railroad bridge down to the bridge or culvert crossing on County Road 28, right near the outlet at the river. So I think if I did the math right, that's about a 0.06 grade of drop going all the way through the system there. The watershed area, per the United States Geological Service, shows to be 81 square miles, and that actually includes watershed that drains to Lake Chamano. So as we talked about, that kind of makes sense from the one watershed, one plan perspective, that it's part of the watershed. And if the lake continued to rise, I think 7 or 8 more feet, the water would naturally discharge to the west and make its way over here. The goal with the project is to move the water over here in a controlled fashion well before it gets that high, or the stories of damages that you heard from the lid are just going to get that much worse. So this is just an overview. I included this slide more so to answer questions. Just kind of trace the map here with an aerial photo. So I'm going to move past that. I wanted to mention that our office did collect a drone flight, and we collected footage. We actually flew the entire project route and then included Todd County Ditch 41. So we flew that last November. We had pretty good flying conditions that day. We got some good imagery. Just the video of Todd County Ditch 41 alone is 20 minutes. So I'm not gonna pop the popcorn and have everybody watch that here tonight. But if there are questions, we can pull that up later and kind of zoom in on certain locations. But I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have that in case there are some specific questions. And I've offered to provide that to Nancy and the county so they have it for their records and helping maybe identify some beaver dams that might be out there. Okay, so that kind of covers the project, and we just went through some more information on Todd County Ditch 41. What we want to get to here is a discussion on the capacity and the ability for that drain to take water, again, with the understanding that the pump is going to provide some flexibility in terms of making sure that there are no adverse impacts. I do want to just give a quick overview without getting too technical, hopefully, on what we're talking about when we're looking at the modeling that we've done to look at that capacity analysis. So when we talk about hydrology, we're really talking about the quantity of water. And so that's basically looking at precipitation, how that translates into runoff off the landscape, and then what that means for stream flows as it moves through a system. And then from there, as that water is in a water system, that movement through the system is what we would refer to as the hydraulics, and that gives us the water elevations and the velocities. So from there, we can look at the capacity, we can identify critical locations along the waterway where we we may want to have monitoring requirements and specific conditions in the plan. And fortunately, there was some information out there that we didn't have to start from scratch. There are existing flood insurance study models and floodplain management tools out there for both the Long Prairie River and actually for Todd County Ditch 41, which is good news. However, those are intended for looking at flood flows, which, as we've talked about, we're not going to be pumping water out of the lake when it's flooding. So we did have to make some improvements to those models in order to analyze the lower flow conditions that we're looking at when operating the project. Morrison County had done a little modeling effort last year where they looked at that blue line ditch. So that provided some good context for us. And then our office had done some work analyzing the system and specifically some culverts, including that railroad bridge that we included that analysis in that original ditch petition. So if I can get this to advance, I just wanted to touch on that Morrison County model that was done by Widseth. They looked at what the impacts would be of adding about 4 cubic feet per second to the ditch. And when they looked at their analysis, you can see at the railroad bridge there, they were talking about potential impacts of just 0.04 of a foot for a 2-year flow. So they were talking in the area of about 70 cubic feet per second total. And at a 10-year flow of about 122 cubic feet per second, that impact is just 0.02 of a foot. So well below, even a half an inch. It's pretty minor from that standpoint. And as we'll talk about later, I think current conditions are far below those flow rates. Our analysis, we looked at that bridge. We made an assumption just for analytical purposes of how much water was in it to start. So we assumed a 3-foot depth in that culvert. And if we added 10 cubic feet per second, the impact was going to be about 0.2 of a foot or 2.4 inches at that location. I think what we're finding is that the water has been far shallower than that for the most part in the recent months anyways. So again, hydrology, precipitation, translating to runoff, translating to stream flows. In this case, we've got an existing watershed that's feeding that system. We're looking to add flows from the project of about 10 cubic feet per second. And as we've talked about numerous times, it's simplified here because we have the controls with that pump versus an uncontrolled open outlet. As I alluded to earlier, those existing models were looking at higher flows and represented situations where we knew we weren't going to be pumping. So we needed to come up with some data to run through the models that we could look at scenarios where we would actually be running the pumps. So fortunately, the USGS or the US Geological Survey has some good data out there. We're able to use their tools, and we were able to come up with flows for the creek without the project, and then we took those flows and added the proposed flows from the project to it. So on this slide, you can see kind of the range of flows that the USGS is showing at the upstream end of the ditch, right at that railroad crossing. So just to provide some context, we're really looking at a range of about 100 cubic feet per second up to maybe 150, somewhere in there for our typical range. As I mentioned, we've been monitoring recent conditions. The LID has been out there on about 4 occasions and measuring the depth of the water at Pulaski Road and Quicken Road. That gives us a good idea to help calibrate our model, but also to kind of give everybody some context of what all this theoretical modeling translates to in the real world. So I'll show some examples of that. And then to help us dial things in, we also just run what we call rating curves through there. So we pick a select number of flows that cover a broad range. We run those flows through the system, and then that helps us identify where the water starts to maybe break out of the channel or where we may have some additional capacity. So we'll get into that here in a second. So as I mentioned, there were some existing models out there. We were able to use those. And then we use the best available data out there in terms of LiDAR surfaces. That's a landscape image where they flew it with lasers and collected relatively accurate data, far more accurate than the old USGS topo maps that were used for a lot of the older modeling efforts. We had more recent culvert surveys. We had some channel surveys that our office had collected. We had the original ditch plans, and then we had some photos as well, both aerial and ground shots. And so we were able to kind of merge all that together And that allowed us to look at the flows and the capacity along the main ditch of Todd County Ditch 41. And so what we're looking for then is, what is the increase in the water elevation as we move the water through the channel? And we're not looking at any scenarios where we're, looking at flood flows where water might be out over the banks. We're looking at those lower flows when we would be utilizing that excess capacity in the channel corridor there. So that kind of moves us in here to another ability of that model is we talked about hydraulics being water elevations, but it also lets us look at velocities. And I know there may be some concerns of erosion in the channel. The model allows us to look at that. The good news there is that the flow ranges that we're looking at with our operating range and with the additional flow from the project, we don't see the potential for measurable increases in erosion. It appears that most of the erosion issues that are present out there that we've seen are likely due to higher flow or flooding conditions where there's more water moving through the system and maybe where a lot of water is trying to squeeze through a bridge or a confinement. You see some eddies and swirling and those types of things that can lead to erosion. But from our analysis, the project is not going to cause measurable increases to the erosion on the system. So I've got a few slides here, and I'm not going to go through a ton of scenarios and put everyone more to sleep than they probably are at this point. But I do want to assure everybody that we have looked into it. Our models have allowed us to analyze the system and provide us with some confidence that we can operate the project without causing significant adverse impacts downstream. So, for example, this image is a profile of the main ditch system. We looked at running the 1.5 and 2 year flows. So again, we're in that roughly 100 cubic foot per second range. And what you see on the bottom, and I'll try to point here for those in the audience, and if I could get some help from Chris, the bottom line is the assumed channel bottom profile. The dotted lines up here are the overbank areas along the bank corridor. So you can see the difference between the two then is the depth of the channel in those locations. And then these colored lines here, which are kind of right on top of each other, would be the modeled depths of the water in the channel when those flows are moving through the system. And then what we can do from there is we pick that 2 year flow of, again, roughly 100 cubic feet per second. We added the assumed project flow of 10 cubic feet per second or 110 total and map those on top of each other. And so that shows us what the impact of the project would be if the pumps were running when we had that 2 year event that hit the system. And what you'll see here is that those impacts are very minimal. And in fact, they're very hard to tell the difference when you look at those scenarios. And in order to help maybe show this in a more pictorial image here, if I can get the slide to move. There we go. These diagrams show that same scenario, but we picked out two kind of well-known, easy to see crossings. So Pulaski Road and Quicken Road. At Pulaski, you actually have a larger culvert there. It's a 6 by 16. And at Quicken Road, it's a 12 by 6. And what our model then shows is if you had that 2 year flow, the depth at Pulaski Road would be about 3.7 feet. And if you added the LID's 10 CFS to it, it would increase about 1.4 inches under that scenario. Similarly down at Quicken Road, and keep in mind here that slope is a big factor on moving water. The ditch is steeper downstream of Quicken. So that's probably why they have a smaller culvert there. We also see then that the depth with that 110 or so cubic feet per second is 2.23 feet without the project. If you add the project in there, it would go up about 1.7 inches under that scenario. And then this just goes to show that really the ditch has capacity under that scenario. And as you know, the base flows, which are typically showing to be much lower than that 100 CFS, there's just that much more capacity to move that additional 10 CFS through the system. I mentioned rating curves. So this is a profile showing a rating curve scenario. So each of these lines in between the bottom and the channel that we talked about in the previous one, these colored lines in there represent a different flow rate. So we have 10, 20, 50, 75, and 100. And again, that just helps us dial in at what flow rate we start to see water, approaching those overbank areas. And then the next slide should be an example. Here's a 100 CFS rating curve example. Again, as we would expect, because this is a very similar flow rate to that 2-year flow we just went through of about 100 CFS. You're again at that 3.7 at Pulaski Road. Adding the water from the lid would be about 1.4 inches of additional height at that location. And at Quicken Road, that additional 10 CFS would raise the water about 1.6 inches. Just wanted to touch base on some of the recent measurements. We were out there on April 2nd, May 14th, I think May 21st and May 28th. The water, I think, has gone down from April 2nd. I was actually kind of surprised that there wasn't more water in the system on April 2nd than there was. But on that date, it was about 1.93 feet deep at Pulaski Road. Had we been pumping on that date and adding 10 CFS, the water would have been about 4.2 inches higher on that date under that scenario. And then jumping ahead on the 21st of May, it was very similar to the 14th, so I didn't make an image for that. But on the 27th, so this was last week, the water was only just over a foot deep at Pulaski. So adding 10 CFS there would have been about 7 inches more water going through that culvert. And at Quicken, we estimated it would have been about 2 inches or 1.8 inches deeper there with those flows. So that kind of concludes the discussion on the capacity of the ditch. And again, if there are questions, we can certainly come back to those slides and dig into those as needed. For those that may be interested in impacts further downstream, I did want to include a discussion on the Long Prairie River. So again, we had a model to start with there. Just to provide some context, the 100-year flow rate here at Long Prairie is over 2,500 cubic feet per second. So the 10 CFS from the LID project would be, a drop in the bucket, although I don't envision they would be pumping when there's a 100-year flood going on. But down at Philbrook, where the ditch outlets, that 100-year flood increases to 5,700 CFS. So there's a lot of watershed and a lot of tributary feeding into the river down there. So again, 10 CFS pales to that flow, but more importantly, that 2-year flow, which is probably more common down at Philbrook, that 2-year flow is 1,500 cubic feet per second. So if you would add 10 CFS, it's going to be 1/100 of a foot or less of an impact if the pump is running at that situation. And as we've talked about with the operating plan will include considerations for the river as well. We'll factor in the USGS gauge here at Long Prairie. That is about 36 river miles upstream of the outlet. So we will need some monitoring locations downstream closer to the outlet. We're envisioning those to be on the Highway 29 bridge and then downstream at US Highway 10, and then anywhere else in between that is deemed appropriate. And then, as we've talked about, we'll be using forecasts there as well. So in addition to weather forecasts, there is a river forecast that's put out by NOAA and the National Weather Service. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to cover next steps, and then I'll take a drink and get ready for questions.
Well, the first thing is the petition hearing, as Mr. Dieter mentioned, will be on June 29th. I believe it will be at 7 p.m. And Todd County will be publicizing that hearing. The next steps for us really it looks like design, permitting, and agency approval. So if the petition is approved, we would move ahead and finish the design of the project and move forward with getting permitting and agency approvals from the DNR, and Corps of Engineers. There's a variety of entities, Morrison County, that we have to get some approvals from. And we're actually hoping that we would get that design and agency approval done by the end of fall of 2021. Then we'll be bidding out and awarding a construction contract. We hope to do that by mid-December. And our other hope is to begin construction in January, with project operation to begin spring of 2022. And that, of course, is all dependent upon weather conditions and approvals by agencies. And with that, I think we have, let's see, We do have some contact information here. It's also in the handout. We have a website with a lot of information about our project. We also have an email address that you're welcome to email us. Mike has information here, and then of course Nancy's information. And I believe we are going to turn it over to Mr. Dieter for comments or for questions. I'm sorry.
I don't have any comments. I just said I would kind of moderate if people want to come up, and I assume the board chair would like them to state their name and maybe where they're located. So at least we have some context. Again, this isn't a time for against, or it's more if you have questions of what the engineer said or anybody said, we'll try and get it to the right person to answer the question for you.
All right, well, my name is Gary Barczyk, and I've got 80 acres on ditch 41. And there's really two prong here. The culvert on County Road 7 is too small, so we have a differential in height. Okay. They replaced that culvert in like 98 or 99, and they put in a way smaller one. So now on one side, it's way higher than the other. And so if you add water to it, even worse than flood my property. So there's some engineering issues there. They put the wrong size culvert in. Because if you go over there, I don't let my kids go there because it siphons all the time. It never sees the light of day, even now when it's dry. And now you're going to add water to that. I guess I got an issue with that. And if you flood my property, if it gets higher, are you going to shut that pump off? I mean, is that what's going to happen? You know, I call you and I come show you, you got water up in my, we used to bale it. Early in the 70s, it was row cropped. And so if you flood that, do I call you and you say, okay, I'm shutting the pump off today? Well, that's my concern. Sure. No.
Probably an engineering question about the operation plan. What would cause it to be shut off so that it doesn't flood out into his property? Beyond what high water might be, trying to compare your project to the current conditions.
Yeah, Gary, thanks for your comments. And I'll come visit you here and just make sure I'm at the right location, both for your property and for that culvert, and see what we can do. Sure. Yep. And as we talked about with the operating plan, you know, we do have a draft, but we wanted to get input from folks like you and from the board as to what areas of concern there were out there. I think the good thing is here we've got, you know, over 3 weeks where we can look into those things and have some answers for the public hearing. And then as appropriate, we can include conditions in that operating plan to address, you know, concerns like yours. And as we talked about, both in terms of where to measure it and then how frequently we would be monitoring it to make sure that your concerns are addressed. So I will, if you need to leave, tap me on the shoulder and we can talk, but otherwise I'll catch you afterwards and we can talk about that culvert. Thanks.
Any other questions? Sure there are, but just kind of if you want to come up and state your name, and we'll try and get it to the right person to, if they don't know the answer tonight, to make sure it's something they can answer by the public hearing.
Hi, I'm Jerry Braver.
I'm Joyce, his wife.
We have 2 parcels that we on the ditch system right now. Likewise, over the past several years, they have come to the point where we cannot harvest our hay anymore because of the wetness, the lack of drainage. I guess my question probably is to the Drainage Authority is if the county is going to, or if you are comfortable with the engineering information that has been provided to you up to this point. In other words, do you feel that there is excess capacity in the ditch now?
And again, like most lawyers, I'll jump in. This isn't, it's a good question. And that's the question the board will have to answer at the public hearing when they get all the information. capacity is one of the issues, or it's one of the main issues. So
Okay.
I'm not trying to duck your question, but that's exactly in order for the board to either approve it with conditions, or deny it. Exactly the question you're asking is what they're going to have to, in their own mind, answer to make a decision.
Okay.
So,
Have the engineering study that's been done, have you looked at the original construction and what the invert of the ditch is presently? The main ditch, I'm talking about the main ditch portion of the project.
Yeah, Nancy did provide us with those original plans. We did take a look at that. There's a lot of information there, and as she talked about, some of that's information, or some of that detail in the plans was constructed and some of it wasn't. And then in terms of newer data, it looks like some of the culverts may be set at lower elevations, or different elevations in the original plan.
But
Nancy and I haven't had a chance to discuss that yet, and just make sure. A lot of the issue, as I talked about, is the datum, where we're dealing with 1916 original plans, and then the datum that the new information is on. So
how about the existing invert of the ditch compared to the original construction? Has that been analyzed by your firm?
in some locations where we
No,
have
the entire ditch for the 6 miles, has that been looked at?
it's been looked at the major road crossings, but everywhere in between, it has not
It
been looked
has
at
not.
every location.
Okay.
Are you planning on looking at the rest or not?
That's where I don't think we need to, in my opinion, based off the analysis that we've done. Again, where we're looking at, really what we're looking at here with these pumps is using that excess capacity. So to the extent that the board provides conditions at certain locations, the lid knows what their targets are. And from that standpoint, the modeling is probably more important to them to know, are they going to be able to operate the pump for 9 months or not? The protection for you folks and for the county board is that if there's a mark drawn on a culvert, or if there's a gauge set in the ditch, if that ditch is at or above that, the pumps are off. So that's really the protection here. And really, it's really down to the lid in terms of how much they want to spend on modeling to get down to the nitty gritty at every location.
But you asked a good question, because separate from this whole process, under ditch law, the drainage authority has a responsibility that if the ditch is not in repair, to repair it, which it gets assessed against the landowners. And again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but it may be, if permission is granted to use an outlet, the lid has to pay a fee to the ditch 41. So it's possible that that money might be used to repair 41. So regardless of as Nancy said to begin with, I don't think 41's been repaired, if ever.
Right.
So set everything aside here. It may be that it needs to be looked at to be some repair work to be done on that.
Just logically thinking, the more water you put in a system, the less chance of the laterals in the mainstream Fish Trap Creek can get into the main ditch. It would just seem like there would be.
That's why I'm sure they operate, if they, again, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but if it would be allowed, the operation and maintenance is going to be the big issue. When can it be running? So just as you said, that it not be running when the ditch is already full, because then you're not allowing the laterals to get their water.
Yeah.
So
Could you, you talk about 10 cubic feet per second. Could you convert that into gallons?
Yep. So that would be, I think the number was 1 cubic foot per second is 7.48 gallons. So
No, let's talk per hour, per day, per month, per 9 months. Could
we can
you-
certainly do that. I can't do it off the top of my head, but we can certainly figure that out. Yeah.
Because throwing a number of 10 cubic feet per second to me is.
Yep.
but you could easily, with a little time,
Oh, yeah.
supply it
Yep.
at so many gallons per minute, so many gallons.
I
per.
thought maybe you would have that.
Yeah, I mean, people envision water in lots of different ways, right? And so for engineers, when we look at surface water, we deal with cubic feet per second. So one other way I can maybe help you out here is just in terms of the lake, I think what's the lake, 1,400 acres, something like that. So, they're looking at, that's 2.3 feet over the ordinary high water mark right now. So let's call it 2 feet. So that means that we're looking at 2,800 acre feet of water that needs to move out of there. And an acre you can envision as about a football field. So we've got about 2,800 football fields that are a foot deep of water. If you can envision that, I don't know if that helps, but to provide some context, that's how much water is going to move through there in 3 to 4 years.
Well, I ran some preliminary numbers, but I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to what my numbers are,
Sure.
but I was just wondering.
We can certainly compare numbers, and I can break it down as many different ways as you want, and we can
That's a
talk through
good
it.
question. I think they'll realize now that comes to the 29th, you'll probably have those numbers, because some people like to say, how much does a garden hose?
Yeah.
Everybody, as he said, envisions water differently.
Sure.
so.
Regarding if they proceed with the outlet fee, the original ditch, when it was constructed, there was charged a benefit. It was a benefit fee.
Right.
On these outlet fees, how are they determined? What criteria is used to?
Excellent question. The statute under 401 simply says an outlet fee. The theory being that this property didn't pay in 1916 to build this ditch. And sometimes you use present value dollars, but in this case, I envision it to be almost like a use fee, not so much going back to 1916 and saying they would have paid X in 1916 and then you present value it. I'm really dancing around. The statute doesn't give exact criteria. The board has a lot of discretion to say, all right, if we grant this with these conditions, again, I don't know what they're going to decide, but if they did that, they have a lot of discretion in deciding what they would charge the LID to use the system. That money only goes into the ditch 41 system. It does not go into the general fund of the county. So whatever they order it to pay, if that should happen, then that money is in the ditch 41 account, which can then be used for repairs or whatever else, but it can only be used on 41. They can't take it and use it on any other ditches.
Okay. It's not that we are opposed
Just don't
necessarily.
have the right facts.
Matter of fact, our daughter owns a place on Lake Shemino. So, but on the other hand, I don't want to be displacing water in a ditch that is, I think, inadequate now to add more water and cause problems downstream. So
You've hit exactly what the issue is, and that's what the board will have to analyze.
okay, thank you.
And Mr. and Mrs. Brewer, isn't your property located kind of on that tributary loop that comes off of Fishback Creek? It's like a little horseshoe kind of comes down there.
As a matter of fact, we don't even have property along a ditch. Our parcels are located on the Fish Trap Creek stream. But yet at the time in 1916, they apparently felt that there was a benefit. So we end up, the parcels ended up being assessed.
Do you
Okay.
have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Nancy, the Morrison County is gonna give us $200,000. So if that ditch has to be cleaned out, how much you suppose it would cost them?
Well, it is about 13 miles long, which is 68,640 feet. And if we clean the entire ditch at $3 a foot, which it's a lot of peat bog, there's gonna be a lot of matting. So $3 a feet might not even be close to what it would be, but at $3 a foot, it would be 205,920. The good thing with peat bog is there's no trees, but there's still, and that I know that the one section, I don't even know how many miles away it is from upland on the Zeta property out there. It's
And
a long ways away from.
Well, I guess the reason I asked is because it has never been cleaned out. And so in order, like he was talking about, there's not enough flow, in certain spots, there's not gonna be.
The main ditch is quite large.
Okay.
I mean, and it's kind of a sandy bottom ditch. Most of the main ditches, the laterals are all the peat areas. There is the main ditch that goes through Zeta's, the horseshoe up there, that is through a lot of peat bog area. But it still has kind of a sandy bottom to it. I'm not sure how much the main ditch would need to be cleaned. I've never done soil borings because the water is so deep. I've never done a soil boring. But the laterals are very overgrown. So, and I didn't calculate out how many feet of it's lateral and how many feet of it's main ditch.
Well, again, it's kind of a side issue, but if at some point the board did order a repair, then you'd have somebody look at it to make sure whatever money you spent was actually accomplishing something. Any other question?
Hank Smith, what about the erosion in the ditches now that's there? We put more water in it, we're probably going to get more erosion. Like on mine, there's the corner there is eroding back like 100 feet. You know, if we keep dumping more in there, pretty soon I'll be out to the road.
And that's one of the things they will have to address, and not only for this hearing, but I assume you, correct me if I'm wrong, I assume you need permits from other people, DNR, and so you'll have some permitting issues. Or am I wrong on that? I could be
And
wrong.
I'm sure there's other spots in there that's, well, my neighbor just up from us, that's eroded on that corner there too.
Can you get your name, sir, and then we'll look into that
Hank
spot?
Smith.
So that he can really look at
It's
it.
right down, right where it comes into the river there.
Okay, yep,
That's that first there. It's Leroy and then Lauren, I guess.
sure, yep. Yeah, we'll look into that again. Just to recap what we kind of went through it, what we're seeing is that most of that's happening, that erosion's happening on the larger events.
Yeah.
When, you know,
comes right in the
yeah,
corner where that-
and under those scenarios, we won't be adding more water to that. But we'll certainly look into that and maybe we can advise the county on things to do there, but.
And then like the beaver control on that, you put more water in there, you're gonna have more beavers, right? Coming
I'm
upstream,
not a beaver expert.
blocking
so I
her off.
don't know.
Nancy, what do you think?
Depends on how much water they bring up, but that is perfect beaver habitat.
Yeah, and they're gonna be blocking that water off more, so we're gonna have probably more than that, more beavers, you know, more trapping, more everything in there.
Yeah.
Cause it's,
Yeah, you're never gonna get away from trapping on that ditch just because it is such perfect habitat. But yeah.
Thank you. I do want to stress so that people, I'm sure you realize, because you speak tonight doesn't mean it stops you. The public hearing is where you also have an opportunity. So don't think if you don't speak tonight or do speak tonight, this is just informational. It doesn't in any way affect your ability on the 29th to ask as many questions you want. Was there somebody in the back? Are they just standing and stretching? Anybody else?
Bruce Eder from Martin.
Kind of got to talk into that. Sorry.
Okay. I was wondering, Lake Shamus says that in Houston Engineer are working closely with property owners on the route to ensure that their property is not detrimental to their property. And on this sheet here, it also states letters of support have been received from all property owners. I myself or my mother has never seen anybody. I just got a call from Artis Thursday night for the first contact in the last 3 years. So what they're printing here isn't true.
So where's,
And
maybe,
then
I'm sure they want to know where your property is so they can talk. to you
Yep,
about
and
it.
Yeah, I'm in Fawn Lake Township in section 15 and the county ditch 41, I'd say is 3/4 to a mile long that runs through our property.
Okay.
And Nancy knows our property pretty well. Which brings me to concern, we got 2 pasture roads and one is awful low. So it needs to be built up. I was talking with Bob like 3 years ago, we was working on an agreement about that, but then nothing got developed.
Just to clarify, the reference to signed letters of support and agreements was for those property owners along the route between Highway 10 and the start of ditch 41. So it isn't for property owners on ditch 41. It's between Highway 10 and that railroad crossing. That's where we were referring to agreements.
Because 41's already there, so they needed in between where the pump is going to be and where 41 starts is where they needed.
Yeah,
Floyd.
41 starts at the railroad
Yep.
bridge.
Yep, thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I gotta go through my notes. I got,
Sure.
so someone won't have to ask, I guess. Then I got some pictures here. I think I sent with Nancy a couple years ago. Did they have them? The
Yeah,
county board?
We'll
too?
make sure if you've provided them at the public hearing, we'll make sure they're part of the records.
Yeah, I
So-
sent, I suppose, a couple years
Yeah.
ago. I think she forwarded them to
Yeah.
the commissioner.
So
But
that'll
this-
definitely be part of the record.
This shows how much the water rate can get high down there, and that's a pretty big culvert because my truck's sitting in there. And it's only like 1.5 feet from the top, so. So that's
No,
why,
those will definitely be addressed by the board and looked at by the
but it
board.
looks like they're doing, excuse me, spring pumping now, right? So that'd help out. Then I wanted to bring up, is Houston Engineering, have you ever looked to go north with the water?
Out of the lake?
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna defer to Cindy on that. She can give the whole history on all the different directions the lid's looked at over the years.
This is actually the third project we've done, so there have been problems with some of the other projects, but one of the things that we try to do is look at what project is most cost effective. There are problems going north. I don't know if you've looked at Lake Shamana, it's very high to the north of us. There's a high ridge. We actually talked to an engineer once about pumping north. It would be extremely expensive. So this is what we found was the most cost-effective project. I know, Rick,
What
if you
size
have
of
any,
pipe are you using?
pardon me?
What size of pipe are you using?
Well, I think we need to recognize, keep in mind that this is a force main, so it's under pressure. So the size is dictated by the flow rate and the pressure. So in this case, the force main, I believe, is 14 inches in diameter.
14.
And the key is it's 10 cubic feet per second. That's the important.
Well, it's looking like if you went north, I know Turtle Prairie River to Molly is 4.7 miles, but if you go up Old Highway 10, what we call by Shamley Acres Resort, the Aztec Road, there's a creek that runs out of West Nelson Swamp right there, and that's only 2.2 miles up from the lake, which I think would be beneficial to pump in that creek. Then if you take off 1.5 miles, it looks like a pipe already, you're only adding another 1.4 miles of a pipe to reach that creek. I don't know if you ever considered that.
I don't know, Rick, do you have any comments on that? We have looked at alternatives. We've had, quite frankly, this is the second engineering firm that we've hired. So the other engineering firm, we asked for advice on many different directions, and we were advised this was the most cost-effective for the project.
Well, that one looks pretty close to me, but try to go up that way. Then you can keep all the engineering permitting in Morrison County and leave Todd County out of it. And then on this beaver problems, Todd County, we're supposed to be, that's our expense too in the future.
Ty, the ditch 41 for beaver control?
Yeah.
Yes,
That'd be Todd County's responsibility.
but if they are granted an outlet and an outlet fee is paid, that money could be used for beaver control. And it can only be used on ditch 41. So it could be used on repairs, on beaver control, whatever this board felt that money should be spent for, as long as it's on 41.
I think Nancy said they had, I think about 39 dams getting blown on that creek so far. I think you remember right.
I didn't look up the number of dams, but I just went by the dollar amount.
So the beaver problem is quite, even if you're only adding a few inches of water, if they start backing up and the dams get higher and higher, you know, you're gonna have Lake Shamma somewhere else in the county. So.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank you
time.
very much.
Yeah, I guess I would add, if there was a beaver dam and the water was backing up, our indicators would show that the pumps would be shut off and then the beaver dams would be cleared.
Okay, any other questions? And again, these have been excellent questions, and if more come up at the public hearing, you'll be able, but this gives an opportunity. The reason for informational meeting is so the board hears your concerns and questions and that the engineer can try and address them.
Can you I be heard via Zoom, or cannot be done?
Is there somebody on that will?
Okay, here.
Brian Rappaway. And Brian, if you are, looks like you're unmuted, please speak clearly and loud.
Okay, my name is Brian Rappaway. I own property on both Quicken Road and I own property in Morrison County, right across the highway from where 202 is, where it's going to come out. And I don't know. I think I have to say what I should say here is, for one thing, I don't think it should be a Todd County problem with a Morrison County issue. I mean, to pump the water through Todd County to get rid of it, I think, and, I've done a lot of work with cities and stuff. I live in St. Cloud, and when I would go to in front of a meeting and you're talking about cost effective, the city would say, we don't care what's cost effective. It's what's got to be done. And the person that's taking on the project has to eat the cost, and then I think that also that county, that ditch 41, if you want to run water through that ditch, it better be looked at and dug out, and everything should be removed. So there is no issue with any property owner, no nothing, to just run water down a ditch that was created in 1916 and just expect it to flow right. I don't think that's very smart at all.
Thank you, Brian. Was it Brian? I think. Thanks,
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
Just so you understand, though, the ditch can only be maintained to original. We cannot make it any deeper than what it was originally.
Well, is there any variances or anything a guy could do? I mean, originally it wasn't expected to carry the water from a 1,500 acre lake. It was made to carry water from a lot of different areas. Now there's got to be a something created or something to say, okay, now it's creating this much flow, so it's got to be deeper, it's got to be dug, it's got to be maintained. There should be X amount of dollars put aside to maintain this ditch and make sure it moves water. And I'm not exactly sure, I'm just getting in on this, but does that cross Quicken Road there, right just east of County Road 7?
Nancy's shaking her head. Yes, it does.
Okay, well, I've been a property owner on that road. It's just 2 miles down from our 200 acre property. And I tell you, that thing is very rickety. And a lot of times of the year, the water is right up to the top in the spring of the year. And I think there should be something done if you're going to do this ditch, that ditch has to be redone. And I think if you're going to do that, you're going to have the cost of Morrison County in the ditch thing, because that ditch and that bridge, if you even call it a bridge, is not in very good shape at all. I'm all for, I see him pumping the Lake Chaminado, and I'm all for doing something. And I surely agree something has to get done, but to just pump it into a ditch that hasn't been repaired or fixed up or anything in 100 years, I think that's just foolish.
Thanks, Brian. And that might be one of the conditions, some clean out of the ditch. Again, those are all the good questions the board will need to address
Right.
when they make their final decision, decision.
Right. Just go look at that, where the ditch goes through underneath Quicken Road there. I mean, my God, there's no railings, there's no nothing. I mean, you start putting more water through there, and boy, there's, and I can't believe the Trantinas aren't at this meeting, because that ditch goes right level with their property. If that goes up at all, that's going to go on their property.
I agree, but I want to make sure we stay on an informational meeting, asking people have definite opinions one way or the other, and I don't want to cut that off, but at the 29th is when that comes up. So if you have factual questions, or Brian, you brought up factual issues about a bridge and about water depth, that's fine, but thanks, Brian. There's somebody else here at the podium too, so.
Okay,
This is Rick Rosar from LID, and I just kind of wanted to address Brian's comments a little bit. Is we understand there's many times throughout the year when the ditch is higher naturally, and we're not going to be adding additional water during those times. And there's probably times throughout the year when the natural water is causing problems. But again, we will not be adding to that problem. We will only be putting our amount of water in there when the ditch is low, you know, not to cause any additional problems that might be around now. So only are we gonna, we're moving water like we anticipate 9 months out of the year. So the other months are times when maybe the pumps are under maintenance, but when the ditch is high during spring runoffs and stuff like that, we will not be moving the water, only when the ditch is at its lower capacity levels.
but is that determined on a day-by-day basis or month by month or what? And who's to say, yes, it is too high and no, it isn't?
This is Kurt Dieter, Brian. That'll all be part of the operation plan. It won't be somebody just guessing when to turn it on and turn it off. There will be monitoring stations. Only because I've done this long enough. It isn't based on somebody thinking something's too high or thinking it's too low. The operation and maintenance plan would have definite monitoring and definite triggering events. So but those are, again, those are the kind of questions people have, and that the engineer and the maintenance plan, if it would be granted, would have to address those issues.
You know, correct, but it's like running a 4-lane highway down a 2-lane highway. Sometimes it's busy, sometimes it's not, but you have to have the infrastructure to be able to handle it.
Right, and we won't be running the water when the 2-lane highway is busy. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but it's almost like off-peak electricity. You know, when there's not a large demand for the channel, that's when we'll be running our water through it, kind of off-peak times. So we won't be adding to a problem that may already be there. If you get a, 8-inch rainfall or something in the area. And there are certain conditions in our operating plan. Now it's a draft, but there are certain conditions where we will be monitoring on a daily basis. And we can actually set up monitoring stations on the Long Prairie River with the data that's there that will send us notifications via email or text when the Long Prairie River is flooding. So there are many scenarios when we can get notifications on a daily basis.
And that would be great. I'm just saying, you gotta look at the whole picture and not just we're dumping water out of Lake Shamana.
I agree, Brian. Any other good questions, Brian? Any other questions? Well, Madam, I don't want to cut people off, but I want to stress tonight was an informational meeting. I believe Mike and they'll be around here if you want to have them. I know this gentleman was going to have them look at some things. That's what the purpose of tonight. Maybe Nancy, tell me, have they gotten a notice of the public hearing yet, or they will?
The newspaper notice is going to be going out on Friday, will be in next week's paper, and then Monday or Tuesday I'm mailing landowner letters, which they'll get.
So those of you that wonder how well do we know definitively when the public hearing is, you will get public notice of it. There's published notice. And it's going to be, but so you know, it's going to be June 29th at 7 p.m. here or where?
That's what we have to determine. Do we want to do it here again, or do we want to do it up at the board meeting now that all of the public?
Is there gonna be a Zoom option then too, or do I have to come there?
If you have, your boardroom's fairly, I like your boardroom. It's up to you if you think it'll be enough room, but just seems to lend itself a little better than a big cavern like this.
If this is all the people that's gonna be there, we can handle it in the boardroom.
Yeah, because this could easily fit into the
boardroom.
yeah, so,
Okay,
all right.
you advertise it as boardroom then?
Madam Chair, we do have seating for about 40 in that room. 35 to 40, and then we also have overflow in the lobby area, so.
So do you feel comfortable? You know, I don't want to force it someplace, but sometimes
Do you feel there will be more people here? I'm seeing a lot of head shakes, yes.
That's what I'm saying.
And we can
Well-
have it here again.
well, then I don't want people upset that they can't get a chair. So if you think it's going to be more, let's hold it here then. If
Okay, let's go ahead and hold it at this same.
You don't want people
facility.
upset already that they can't even get into the rooms. So.
Yeah.
And-
My other question, are we gonna provide, we're not gonna provide Zoom though, right? Since everybody's allowed to come in and there's not a limit of how many people can be in the room?
It's nice to have the Zoom part of it in case for travel.
Very hard to hear though.
I would vote for the Zoom being the travel issue.
Are we set up that we can do Zoom out here yet, Chris?
And Madam Chair, we can work on that sound issue.
Okay. I think you're going to see a lot more hybrid with meeting with a Zoom alternative for health or distance or whatever reasons people have. I think people have kind of gotten used to it. So if I'm correct, it's June 29th, 7 PM at this location. And again, there'll be mailed notices sent out, so you'll
That's
get
correct.
something. And that will be then the public hearing. And in that hearing, I'll be going more through with the board what they're, under the statute, what they need to address and make their decisions. So I think, I don't want to cut it off, but I think it was a good informational meeting. It provided a lot of information. If you want to come up and talk to the engineer or representatives of the LID, I'm sure they're more than happy to talk to you. So I think we're complete for tonight, and the public hearing will be on the 29th.
Yep, thank you for coming.
So did they give us a total watershed area?
They did.
So it's the,
Um,
oh, south of Quicken Road,
Barb.
okay.